The story of the Sodder family cannot be understood without first painting a vivid portrait of the time and place in which their tragedy unfolded. The year was 1945, and the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, was a community perched on the edge of a new era. The Second World War had just ended in victory, and the nation was collectively exhaling, its young men returning home to build the prosperous lives they had fought for. Yet, in countless towns like Fayetteville, the war had left invisible scars and exposed deep-seated tensions that simmered beneath the surface of patriotic unity. Fayetteville was a coal and railroad town, its economy and social fabric woven from the tough, resilient threads of immigrant labor. Among these communities, the Italian immigrants were a distinct and vibrant group. They had come to West Virginia seeking work in the mines and on the railways, bringing with them their traditions, their strong family values, and often their fierce political loyalties. In the years leading up to the war, the rise of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party in Italy had created a sharp divide within Italian-American communities across the United States. For some, Il Duce was a symbol of national pride and strength, a leader who had restored order and respect to Italy. For others, he was a brutal dictator, a betrayer of democratic values. George Sodder, born Giorgio Sodder in Tula, Sardinia in 1895, fell squarely and vocally into the latter category. He had arrived in America as a 13-year-old boy in 1908, passing through the hallowed gates of Ellis Island with little more than the clothes on his back and a determination to succeed. Through decades of back-breaking work, he had built a life far removed from the poverty of his youth. He owned a successful coal trucking business, a fleet of vehicles that hauled the lifeblood of the region's industry. He was a self-made man, proud, stubborn, and fiercely independent. His success, however, did not mellow his opinions. He was openly and bitterly critical of Mussolini, a stance he was never shy about expressing in the coffee shops and barber shops of Fayetteville's Italian community. This outspokenness made him enemies. It was a dangerous game to play in a small, close-knit town where everyone knew everyone else's business. The threat was not abstract. In the months and years before that fateful Christmas, the Sodders experienced a series of unsettling incidents that, in retrospect, would form a terrifying pattern. The most direct threat came from an insurance salesman. After George refused to buy a policy from him, the man's demeanor turned dark. He reportedly told George, "Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." The words were so specific, so venomous, that they lingered in the air long after the man had left. On another occasion, a stranger came to the house asking for work. As George showed him around, the man pointed directly at the home's electrical fuse boxes and said, "This is going to cause fire someday." The warning was unnerving because the wiring was new and had been installed by a licensed electrician. There was no reason for concern. Then there were the reports from the older Sodder children about a strange car that would sometimes park on the main highway overlooking their property. The men inside would simply sit and watch, their gaze fixed on the younger Sodder children as they walked home from school. These events were chilling, but in the flow of daily life, they were dismissed as oddities, the price of living in a small town where not everyone saw eye to eye. At the heart of this gathering storm was the Sodder home itself, a bustling two-story wooden frame house filled with the chaotic, joyful energy of 10 children. George and his wife Jennie, Cipriani, also of Italian descent, had created a warm and loving environment. The children ranged in age from infancy to young adulthood. The eldest, Josephine, was 23 and married, living elsewhere. Next was 22-year-old Joe, who was serving in the U.S. Army and stationed in Italy at the war's end. Then came Marion, 19, John, 17, George Jr., 16, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5. The house was always alive with noise, the clatter of dishes from the kitchen where Jennie cooked vast Italian meals, the sound of the older children's music, and the playful shouts of the younger ones running through the halls and playing in the large attic space that George had converted into a playroom for them. Christmas Eve 1945 was a typical happy evening for the family. Marion had returned from her job at the local dime store with new toys for her younger sisters. Excited by the holiday, the 5 youngest children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, begged to stay up late to play. Their parents, feeling the festive spirit, relented. As a special treat, the children were allowed to drag their mattresses and blankets up to the attic playroom for a slumber party. It was a decision that would later be agonized over for decades. The older children, Marion, John, and George Jr., retired to their own bedrooms on the second floor. George and Jennie went to their first floor bedroom, directly below the living room. The last sounds in the house were the happy, whispered giggles of the 5 children in the attic, slowly fading into the quiet of a rainy West Virginia night. The stage was set for a horror that would defy explanation. The story of the Sodder family is a descent into a nightmare that began not with a fire, but with a whisper of political hatred in a small American town. To understand the depth of this mystery, to follow the threads of threat and fear that led to that Christmas Eve, you must join us on this investigation. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single detail of this unfolding tragedy.
The first sound was not of fire, but of impact. Around 12:30 in the morning on December 25th, a thunderous crash reverberated through the quiet Sodder house, jolting George and Jennie from their sleep. It was followed by the sound of something heavy rolling and thudding across the roof above them. Before they could even process the noise, the telephone on the wall in their bedroom rang, sharp and insistent in the midnight silence. Jennie, disoriented, answered it. A woman's voice, unfamiliar and oddly light, asked for a name Jennie did not recognize. When Jennie said there was no one there by that name, the woman gave a strange, laughing chuckle and hung up. The line went dead. This was the last time the Sodder telephone would ever function. Minutes later, George's senses were assaulted by a new horror, the acrid, unmistakable smell of smoke. He leapt from the bed and rushed into the hallway. What he saw defied belief. The living room, directly above their bedroom, was not merely on fire, it was a raging inferno, a solid wall of flame that seemed to have ignited instantaneously. There was no slow build, no creeping tendrils of smoke. It was as if the room had been doused in gasoline and lit with a match. He screamed for Jennie to get the children out. What followed was a panicked, nightmarish scramble against an impossible deadline. Jennie, thinking with a clarity born of pure adrenaline, ran outside to get the extension ladder that was always kept propped against the side of the house. It was their only means of reaching the second-floor windows in the attic, but the ladder was gone, vanished. George, meanwhile, had another idea. He raced to his coal trucks, intending to drive them close to the house so the children could jump onto their roofs. He turned the ignition on the first truck. Nothing. The battery was completely dead. He tried the second truck. Dead. The third. Dead. Every single one of his meticulously maintained vehicles was immobilized. It was a sabotage so complete it felt supernatural. Meanwhile, the 3 older children on the second floor, Marion, John, and George Jr., were awakened by the commotion and the terrifying glow of the flames. Thick, black smoke was already pouring into the hallway, making breathing difficult and visibility nil. Choking and terrified, they managed to feel their way to their windows. The roof over their parents' first-floor bedroom created a lower section they could jump onto, and from there, to the ground. They escaped with minor injuries, joining their parents in the front yard where the family stood united in helpless, screaming horror. Their eyes were glued to the single attic window. They could hear the voices of their 5 younger siblings, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, crying and screaming for help. The children were alive and trapped. The family screamed encouragement, promising help was coming, but the flames were a voracious beast. consuming the wooden frame of the house with terrifying speed. The heat was so intense it forced them back across the yard. As they watched, the screams from the attic grew more frantic and faded, and then stopped altogether. The roof over the attic gave way with a roar, collapsing inward and sending a volcano of sparks and flame into the rainy night sky. The entire structure was consumed in less than 45 minutes. The Fayetteville Volunteer Fire Department arrived, but their efforts were futile against the Holocaust. They could only pour water on the glowing, collapsing ruins. As dawn broke on Christmas Day, the scene that greeted the pale light was one of utter devastation. The Sodder home was gone, reduced to a smoldering, blackened pile of ash and charred timber. The family, shivering in their nightclothes, stood amidst the wreckage of their lives, their faces etched with a grief so profound it was palpable. The fire chief, F.J. Morris, and the local authorities began their assessment. The Sodders, numb with shock, waited for them to find the remains of their 5 children. The firemen poked through the hot ashes with poles. They found small, recognizable items, melted coins, the metal parts of Jennie's sewing machine, porcelain knobs from the bedposts. But they found no bodies. They found no bones. Chief Morris offered a theory. The fire, fueled by the coal stored in the basement, had burned so hot that it had completely consumed the children's bodies. He pointed to a few small, lumpy piles of a substance he called ashes and declared that these were the mortal remains of the 5 Sodder children. To George and Jennie, this explanation was not inadequate. It was an affront to reason and a violation of natural law. George, who worked with coal every day, knew its properties. He knew that even the hottest coal fire does not vaporize human bone. It does not annihilate every tooth, every fragment of a skull, every piece of metal from a bed frame or a child's toy. As the reality of the official pronouncement set in, a new and terrifying conviction began to root in their hearts, a conviction that would define the rest of their lives. Their children had not been in that fire. The absence of proof was not proof of death, it was proof of something else entirely, something far more sinister.
Jennie Sodder, transforming her grief into a relentless campaign, began writing letters. She wrote to the governor of West Virginia. She wrote to the FBI, pleading with Director J. Edgar Hoover to open an investigation. The FBI's response was a cold, bureaucratic refusal. Without evidence of a federal crime, such as interstate kidnapping, they had no jurisdiction. She wrote to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who would listen. The family hired a private detective, but he made little progress against the wall of local silence and official disinterest. The Sodders were not just grieving parents. They were now investigators, confronting a conspiracy of silence. Their findings pointed overwhelmingly to arson and foul play. The removed ladder, the disabled trucks, the cut phone line. These were not random events. They were the tactics of someone who wanted to ensure the family could not escape or call for help. The incredible speed and intensity of the fire pointed to the use of an accelerant. The lack of bodies pointed to kidnapping. The official investigation had ignored all of this, choosing the simplest explanation rather than the true one. The Sodders were left alone, battling not just a mystery, but an entire establishment that had already decided the case was closed. The corruption of the official investigation into the Sodder Fire is a scandal that echoes through history. When the authorities tasked with finding the truth become the biggest obstacle to it, where can a family turn? The answer lies in a lifetime of relentless pursuit. To follow the Sodder family's quest for justice, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter. With the door to official justice slammed shut and bolted, George and Jennie Sodder embarked on a private, lifelong crusade that would become their new raison d'etre. They transformed their profound grief into an engine of relentless inquiry. The empty, ash-strewn lot where their home once stood became a permanent command center and a stark monument to their missing children.
They never rebuilt. Instead, they erected something far more powerful, a large, professionally painted billboard. This billboard featured individual photographs of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder. Their young, smiling faces stared out at every car and truck that passed on U.S. Route 16. Below the photographs was a simple, heartbreaking plea for information and an offer of a reward that was astronomical for the time: $10,000 for information leading to the return of their children or the solution of the case. This billboard stood for over 20 years, a constant, silent accusation against the town of Fayetteville and a daily reminder of the 5 souls who had vanished from its midst. The billboard and the national media attention it eventually attracted began to generate leads. The family followed every one, no matter how faint or far-fetched. The first significant tip came from a traveling salesman. He reported that shortly after the fire, he was in a diner in Charleston when he overheard a conversation between several Italian-speaking men. They were boasting about doing a job in Fayetteville and stated clearly that the kids in the house didn't die. When one of the men noticed the salesman listening, he was threatened and told to forget what he heard. The description of one of the men matched the insurance salesman who had threatened George before the fire. Another witness, a woman from a nearby community, came forward with a story that would haunt the Sodders forever. She claimed that in the early hours of Christmas morning, she was driving on a road near the Sodder property when her headlights illuminated a strange scene. A car pulled over on the shoulder, and several adults hurriedly ushering a group of crying, disheveled children into the vehicle. The children matched the general ages and descriptions of the missing Sodder children. She didn't come forward at the time because she was afraid and had assumed, like everyone else, that the children had perished.
Then, in 1949, a full 4 years after the disappearance, came the most tantalizing and cruel piece of evidence. The Sodders received an anonymous letter in the mail. There was no return address. It was postmarked from St. Louis, Missouri. Inside, there was no letter, only a single, blurred, black and white photograph of a young man who appeared to be in his late teens or early 20s. On the back of the photograph, written in ink, was a cryptic message. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Ill boys, A mine 0132 or 35. The family was electrified. The young man in the photo bore a striking, uncanny resemblance to what an older Louis Sodder might have looked like. The nickname Frankie was particularly significant. It was the family's nickname for their eldest son, Joe. The numbers were believed to be a military service number. To the Sodders, this was not a hoax. It was a sign of life. It was Louis reaching out to them. They became obsessed with the photograph. They hired private investigators to trace its origin. George and Jennie even traveled to St. Louis themselves, showing the photograph to everyone they could. But the trail went cold. The photograph became their most sacred and painful relic, a ghost from a future that was forever out of reach. The emotional toll on the entire family was immense. The surviving Sodder children, Marion, John, George Jr., and Joe, who had returned from the war, had to live their lives in the overwhelming shadow of the disappearance. They supported their parents' quest, but they also had to build their own families and careers. The constant flow of tips, some well-meaning and others cruel hoaxes, kept the wound perpetually open. Christmas, once a celebration, became an annual ordeal of remembrance and pain. Yet through it all, George and Jennie never wavered. They maintained a meticulously organized file of every letter, every newspaper clipping, every potential sighting. Their home became an archive of a single, unresolved night. The photograph of Louis is one of the most haunting artifacts in American true crime history. Was it a genuine cry for help, or a monstrous hoax? The answer lies at the heart of the Sodder mystery. To examine the image for yourself and to follow the decades-long search it inspired, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next installment. The decades rolled on, but the Sodder family's resolve did not diminish. George Sodder passed away in 1968, 23 years after the fire. He was a man broken, not by his labor, but by a mystery he could not solve, his heart burdened by the weight of unanswered questions. Jennie Sodder, however, carried the torch alone. Her determination seemed to grow stronger with age, her will forged in the fires of her loss. She continued to give interviews, to write letters, and to maintain the files, always hoping the next phone call would be the one that brought her children home. In 1969, a full 24 years after the fire, a dramatic new development occurred. A new highway was being constructed near the Sodder property. During the excavation work, a bulldozer operator unearthed a strange object in the soil near the site of the old house basement. It was a human heart. The operator, horrified, alerted the authorities. The sheriff, a new man who had been a boy when the fire occurred, was finally compelled to act. He ordered a proper excavation of the site, something George had begged for decades. Workers dug several feet down into the earth beneath where the basement had been. The discovery, or rather, the lack of discovery, was both vindicating and devastating for the family. They found no other human remains, no bones, no teeth, no fragments of clothing. The solitary heart was sent to the state forensic lab for analysis, but without modern DNA technology, which was still decades away, the analysis was inconclusive. It could not be identified. The heart was preserved in a jar of formaldehyde, but its whereabouts were eventually lost over the years. To Jennie, the heart was not proof her children had died. It was proof of the catastrophic incompetence of the original investigation, which had failed to find it in 1945. If they had missed a human heart, what else had they missed? Jennie Sodder died in 1989, spending 45 years of her life searching for her 5 children. She never accepted their deaths. Until her final breath, she believed they had been taken, and that they might still be alive somewhere, perhaps unaware of their true identities. The mantle of the investigation was passed to the surviving Sodder children, and then to their grandchildren, who continue to seek answers to this day. They have cooperated with authors, documentarians, and podcasters, ensuring that the story of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty is not forgotten.
The legacy of the Sodder children's disappearance is complex and enduring. It is first and foremost a story of unimaginable parental love and resilience. George and Jennie Sodder refused to be silenced or placated. They fought the official narrative with every fiber of their being, and in doing so, they exposed a shocking level of incompetence and indifference in local law enforcement and government agencies. Their case is studied as a prime example of how confirmation bias and a desire for a quick resolution can pervert the course of justice. The mystery also serves as a dark snapshot of a specific moment in American history. It reveals the ethnic tensions that could simmer beneath the surface of small-town America, the lingering loyalties to the old world that could turn violent, and the vulnerability of a family who dared to voice unpopular political opinions. The theory that the children were kidnapped by pro-fascist elements within the Italian-American community and smuggled back to Italy remains the most plausible explanation for the lack of bodies and the preceding threats. Modern forensic analysis certainly discredited the official complete cremation theory. Experts universally agree that a house fire cannot generate or sustain the heat needed to vaporize 5 human bodies. The presence of so many small, heat-vulnerable objects in the ashes is definitive proof that the fire was not hot enough to consume bone. The electrical fire theory has also been completely debunked by experts who note the lack of a viable ignition source. The evidence, when viewed through a modern lens, points overwhelmingly to arson and kidnapping. The story endures because it is the ultimate unresolved narrative. It offers no closure, no neat answers. It is a black hole of grief and mystery that continues to pull in anyone who encounters it. The questions remain as potent as they were on that Christmas morning in 1945. Who took the ladder? Who killed the trucks? Who made the phone call? Where are the bodies of the 5 children? The Sodder family billboard is gone now, but the questions it asked are forever etched into the history of American crime. The mystery of the Sodder children is a flame that refuses to be extinguished. It is a story that challenges our faith in justice and forces us to confront the unthinkable. If you are drawn to puzzles that defy solution, to history stained with tragedy, then your search leads you here. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. The story isn't over yet. In the 21st century, the disappearance of the Sodder children has transitioned from a local tragedy to a foundational American mystery, dissected on online forums, true crime podcasts, and documentary specials. This modern scrutiny has applied new forensic standards and historical analysis to the evidence, often arriving at conclusions that starkly condemn the official investigation and offer compelling, though still unproven, narratives. A modern forensic anthropologist would dismiss the complete cremation theory out of hand. The process of reducing a human body to bone fragments and then to ash requires sustained temperatures of between 1400 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit in a specialized crematorium retort for several hours. A wood frame house fire, even when accelerated by coal or an accelerant, burns at a much lower average temperature and is wildly uneven. It simply cannot achieve the conditions necessary for total annihilation. The survival of porcelain knobs, which vitrify at temperatures far lower than those needed to destroy bone, is irrefutable proof that the children's bodies were not present. The only logical conclusion is that they were removed before the fire was set. The bus driver's testimony, once an inconvenient outlier, is now considered crucial. If Earl Morris's account is accurate, the house was not on fire at 12:30 a.m. This creates a potential window of up to 45 minutes between the strange noises and phone call heard by the Sodders and the discovery of the fire. This is more than enough time for perpetrators to enter the home, subdue and remove 5 children from the attic, and set the fire to cover their tracks. The piece of beef he saw in the road could have been a dropped item during a struggle or a deliberate roadblock.
The photograph of Louis remains the case's greatest enigma. Digital enhancement has provided little new clarity. The number on the back, A90132 or 35, has been scrutinized. It does not cleanly match the format of World War II-era U.S. military service numbers, though it could be a partial or misremembered number. Some researchers suggest it might be a Social Security number, but no match has been found. The phrase "ill boys" remains a complete cipher, though some speculated could be a misspelling of little boys or something in another language. While many researchers believe the photo was a cruel hoax, its timing and specific details, Frankie, make it difficult to entirely dismiss. The possibility that it was a genuine failed attempt at communication torments the family to this day. The most coherent modern theory synthesizes all the evidence into a narrative of a targeted, politically motivated kidnapping. George Sodder's vocal anti-fascism made him a marked man within a segment of his own community. The threats were real. The events of Christmas Eve display a chilling level of coordination. The reconnaissance, the strange car, the threats, the insurance salesman, the sabotage, the ladder removal, battery draining, phone line cut, the arson, use of an accelerant, and the abduction itself. The perpetrators likely intended to murder the entire family as revenge for George's views.
However, the escape of the older children and the rapid spread of the fire may have forced them to abort their full plan, fleeing with the 5 youngest children as living trophies or to be ransomed later. They were then allegedly smuggled out of the country, possibly to Italy, to be raised in secrecy. The continued silence of the local community in Fayetteville is often cited as supporting evidence for this theory. In tight-knit immigrant communities, omerta, a code of silence often prevailed. Fear of the Black Hand or other intimidation tactics could have kept witnesses from coming forward for generations. Today, the Sodder case is less about finding a definitive answer and more about honoring the family's struggle and learning from the catastrophic failures of the past. It stands as an eternal reminder of the dangers of investigative laziness and the power of a parent's love. The surviving Sodder descendants still hope for a resolution, however unlikely. The lost heart, if ever found, could potentially be analyzed for DNA, but its location is a mystery within a mystery. The disappearance of Maurice, Martha, Loie, Jennie, and Betty Sodder is America's unfinished story. It is a void that refuses to be filled, a question that refuses to be answered. It lives on because it represents every family's deepest fear, and because it proves that sometimes the truth is a lie. The truth is out there, not in the ashes of a West Virginia house, but in the shadows of a history that has yet to be fully told. The mystery of the Sodder children is a black hole in the universe of true crime, a case that consumes all light and offers none in return. But we must continue to look into it. We must continue to ask the questions that George and Jennie Sodder asked for a lifetime. If you believe that some truths are worth searching, no matter how long it takes, then you belong here. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell.